Now we have reached the third Sunday in Lent, which is today. And we're not quite half through. Now Lent, we all know as Roman Catholics, is a time for spiritual repair. We subject ourselves to a general overhaul spiritually. That is what we should do in Lent. And then Lent becomes the model for the rest of the year. So each Lent should see us a little closer, not only in time, but in quality, to the kingdom of God. Now this morning I want to give a talk, probably not a sermon. I want it to be down to earth, if I can make it so, on some of the aspects of Lent. And I want to talk about sin. In this highly sophisticated age in which we live, when mankind has drawn further and further away from the truth of our holy faith, we are subjected to a barrage of propaganda which makes out as though sin has no real existence, as though it's something which a belief in sin is considered as something which is a hangover from a more primitive age. Now, as Roman Catholics, as members of the body of Christ, we believe profoundly in sin. And I want to talk with you this morning about certain practical ways that we have of dealing with sin. And these are useful thoughts, I hope, for Lent. Now, the first step in the battle against sin is to take sin seriously, to realize just how grave a thing it is. Sin is not just a matter of making certain errors in our daily conduct. Sin is not just a matter of falling into certain mistakes and making certain missteps. Sin is a much deeper thing than that. Sin is something which has a total force over us, and it's a destructive force. Sin is a horrible, malignant sickness which can gnaw at the soul and become a veritable cancer. Sin is the hideous entity which separates us from God and which removes His grace from inside of our soul. Sin is the horrible thing which drives us, as it drove the prodigal son, into a far country, distant from God's kingdom. So sin is like that. Sin gets in and seeks to destroy that flicker within us which is the image of God, which is the umbilical cord that joins us to God. So sin is a total horrible entity, a foul and unspeakable disease. Sin is the great destructive, separating force in the universe. Now, I've always found that good people, good Roman Catholic people, often get confused in their thinking about sin. They confuse temptation and sin, and those are not the same thing. Temptation is something which is unavoidable. We cannot avoid temptation in this life. It is totally impossible. The angels even could not avoid temptation, because Lucifer fell from heaven and became the devil. The saints of God have not been able to avoid temptation, to get out of its range. Even the most cloistered Carmelite nun, inside of her enclosure, separated from the outside world by a black veil when she comes to the grill to talk, she is subject to every temptation that you and I are out here in the world. Speaking of Carmelite nuns, I don't know whether now in the Conciliar Church they exist, or what manner they've jazzed up their vocation in. But I'm talking about the Carmelite nuns in the old church, who were very holy and good women. Even our blessed Lord was tempted by the devil. So temptation is unavoidable. We have to face it. We have to face it every day of our human lives. And temptation is not sin. Temptation is a sort of a process. It begins usually in our mind and in our imagination. We see something, or we think of something, and we consider how pleasurable it would be to do that or to have that. And then our imagination carries us on from there, step by step, and we approach the precipice. Now, as I say, temptation in none of its stages is sin, but it is very dangerous. We go step by step toward the process. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas, who is the Roman Catholic authority both in dogmatic theology and in moral theology, tells us quite definitely that nobody has committed a sin until the final consent of his will. In other words, you can go through all those stages of temptation and still not commit a sin until you have given your final consent of will. And then you're in sin. Now, what that means in practical terms is this. There is always a retreat during temptation. We can always go back and get away from that dangerous precipice there in front of us. Even up to the last moment, before giving consent of our will, we can go back. We can refuse sin. Now, I want to emphasize that because some people, there's a sort of a psychological quirk that afflicts, I think, all of us. If we get into temptation up to the danger point of committing a sin, we feel, well, I've come this far, I might as well go now and jump over it. Go over the precipice. Give my final consent and do it. But remember, there is always a retreat behind you. You can go back. And if you go back, you have not committed a sin. You've been playing a very dangerous game. But you have not committed a sin until you give your final consent. Now let me give you an example of this. I'm going to invent an imaginary Mrs. X. Now Mrs. X reads in her morning paper that the big department store in this locality, whichever it is going to have a sale. Powers, I think, Minneapolis, St. Paul. So she decides, she takes all of her available cash, and she goes to the sale. And she looks around, she finds there are masses of people there. And all the shop assistants are very busy handling people, dealing with them, selling them things. There's great confusion and chaos. And there are signs up which say shoplifters will be prosecuted. Shoplifting is one of the great things in this consumer's age of ours, which causes prices to go up. Because some of these very big firms lose millions of dollars by shoplifters. And then they add that extra money that they've lost onto the prices we have to pay. So shoplifting is quite a thing in this day and age. I was in a shop in Buffalo not long ago, and I saw an amusing poster up there. It said, "Free bracelets are given to shoplifters." And it showed a picture of two hands there with handcuffs on. Those were the bracelets. But at any rate, we all have, as one of our moral guides, the commandment, "Thou shalt not steal." And so Mrs. X goes to her safe. And she sees there in front of her a very beautiful bracelet. And all of her desires immediately become concentrated. She thinks, oh, if I could only have that bracelet. She begins to think how lovely it would look on her wrist. How the stones in it would go with her certain dresses she had. How Mrs. So-and-so across the street would be wild with jealousy when she saw it on her wrist. She thinks of all those things. And she builds up this imaginative picture of herself with this bracelet on her wrist. And then she looks into her pocketbook. She can't make it. She hasn't got that much money. She begins to think, how can she do it? Perhaps she can take it out of her the extra money out of her grocery allowance and buy cheap cuts of meat. Put less sugar in her pies and cakes. But she thinks, no, that's too dangerous. Her husband will catch on to that. So finally, she becomes desperate for that bracelet. And she picks it up. Her shopping bag is here. And she takes it over. And the bracelet is right over the shopping bag. And she is ready to release her grip on the bracelet. And then suddenly, she says no. The bracelet goes back. She places it back on the counter, and out she goes of that shop, fleeing from temptation. She has withdrawn at the 11th hour. At 11:59, she has withdrawn. She's gone back. Something came into her mind to save her. She was a Roman Catholic. She remembered she had to mention that in confession. She wondered what Father so-and-so would think if she had to confess to shoplifting. Or perhaps she thought that there might be a television camera pointed at her. Or she thought that shop assistant over there in the next department was looking her direction. But whatever it was, she stopped in time. So now the point is, did she commit a sin? No, she didn't. Did she steal the bracelet? No, she did not. When she goes to confession, she might confess that. And the priest might ask her, did you actually take the bracelet? She'll say no. And he said, well, forget it. Temptation is not sin. But now don't think for a moment that I'm advising you to go up to the brink, to go too near the edge of the precipice. Because if you do, there's a good chance you might go over into sin. Stop in time. When temptation comes, stop as quickly as you can. Grab your rosary. Catch hold of your crucifix. Say an Ave Maria. Do something, but don't let the temptation go on. But if you do get in far into temptation, remember you can always draw back. Don't have this silly idea that because you've gone so far that you have to go on over and commit sin. Now that's just a practical little thing, but we do encounter these situations. And I want to mention it. Now that business of shoplifting, theft, apply it to our fleshly desires. Temptation begins in the imagination. Some picture is there of some erotic subject that attracts. The weakness in our flesh comes surging up. And we go through those steps and get near to the brink. Remember, you can always get back so long as you don't give that final consent of will. But don't go too far, because it's dangerous. When we're in temptation, we're like a man going toward quicksand. And we can be sucked up before we know it. Sin is like that. But I want to emphasize you can always draw back before you give your consent of will. It's never too late. You can go right up to 11:59, but don't try it. Draw back quicker than that, more quickly than that. Now, I'm talking about fleshly desires. We're all weak. We're all human. Why add to that weakness, as some people do by looking at pornographic pictures? Why add to that weakness by going to pornographic movies or watching them on TV? Avoid those things like the very plague. Like the very plague. You know, last week, or the other day rather, coming here, I was reading in the Detroit Free Press that 100 million people had watched the final take of the film MASH, the series MASH on TV. They gave a 2-hour MASH show, and that was the end. They're not going to make any more. And all over the country, and this country and Canada, there were MASH parties, people saying goodbye to MASH. Well, I can tell you one person who said goodbye to MASH with great gratitude, and that was myself. I said, goodbye, MASH. My message to you is go, get lost, never come back. Because I've never watched MASH willingly, but I've had to watch it once or twice unwillingly when I've been in other people's houses and they've been watching it, I've been there. And the dialogue in that wretched thing was largely concerned with one thing, and that is sex, in a very unpleasant manner. And so I'm glad, very glad, to see the end of MASH. And I'd be glad to see the end of quite a few other television shows that afflict this continent. So, in these weaknesses, why should we add to our difficulties and our weakness by looking at pornographic things? Where I live, I go to get my hair cut in an area about a mile from where I live, which is heavily Italian. The people who live in that section are very heavily Italian. The barbershop I go to is an Italian barbershop. Well, now, Italian people of Italian descent, Italian Americans or Canadians, are all Roman Catholic. At least they may be good Catholics, they may be bad Catholics, but at any rate, they're all Catholics. And when they see a clerical collar, they sort of sit up and look. They sort of come to attention. So with amusement, I've noticed several times when I've gone into that barbershop to get a haircut, that somebody or other is sitting there reading a certain magazine, a very dirty magazine called Playboy. And I've been amused to see that sometimes they look up and they see this dreadful collar and Playboy goes down and they try to hide it. But at any rate, I should like to burn these copies of Playboy, but I can't take them. I can't steal them. However, remember, temptation is a process. It's a development in the imagination, in the mind. And we can stop before it's too late. Now, that's a good thing to learn in Lent. Another sin that afflicts a great many people is losing one's temper. We all have tempers. We all lose our temper. All of us. But some people are more afflicted than other people. Some people have especially hot tempers. And their tempers get them into a great many difficulties. I've often thought that it would be a very good thing if there could be an organization established on the lines of Alcoholics Anonymous for people who have very hot tempers. Because losing one's temper is in many ways like getting drunk. When one loses one's temper, one gets outside of oneself. One becomes irrational. One becomes sort of zigzag. Everything becomes distorted, blurred. And one does things which one wouldn't do if one were not in that state of temper, and says things. If we could have sort of motion pictures taken of ourselves when we're in a temper, I think we would be more careful to control our tempers, because in tempers we very often lose our human dignity, just as a drunk man loses his human dignity. So tempers lead to all sorts of other problems in life. A father who has a hot temper and who punishes his children when he's under the influence of a hot temper, in a fit of temper, loses the respect of his children very often. He loses authority with them. And sometimes he loses their confidence. A man with a very hot temper who takes his temper out on his wife can break up a marriage. He can certainly make his wife unhappy and miserable. A hot temper can break up a marriage and finish it off. A hot temper can lead to battered wives and battered children. And that is a horrible thing in our modern civilization. Husbands who beat their wives and black their children's eyes and kick them around. One sees pictures sometimes of children with a black eye, some poor little girl, 3 years old, with a black eye. Her father's done that to her, either in drunkenness or in a hot temper. How shameful and horrible a thing it is. That can be the result of a hot temper, uncontrolled. You know, a woman came to me once, this happened a long way from here, many thousands of miles, even in another country, another continent. So I can tell it to you. A woman came to me, and she told me that she had a terrible temper, and that her temper was constantly getting her into trouble. She was a widow, she had one child to support, and she had already, because of her temper, lost her job several times. And she was miserable, she was wretched. And she poured forth to me. She had been to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist had given her a few helpful hints, but he hadn't really helped her. Well, what can one do? What can one do to heal a temper? Except pray. And keep on praying. Well, I talked with her, and I gave her some little practical hints. She had a good sense of humor, and I thought that was all to the good. Several times she laughed, and I thought that was helpful. It's easier to deal with a person who has a sense of humor than a person who doesn't have a sense of humor, and things like that. So she told me all these terrible stories of things that happened to her, and I felt very sorry for her. I said, I must try to help this woman. Well, I told her I'd pray for her. I told her, to go to the saints. I told her to go to our Blessed Lady. And I talked to her a great deal about, stopping and counting to 50 before she said anything, holding her tongue and all that. All those practical bits of information. Now, I remember I said to her, look, when you feel that, she told me that when a temper was coming on, she could feel heat sort of going up her body and settling here in the back of her neck. I said, well, I'll tell you what. Just imagine that when you feel that heat coming up, that you've got a big pitcher of ice-cold water and you pour that over yourself to cool yourself down. So we both laughed about that. So she went off. I didn't see her for 2 or 3 months. She came back to me and she said, I've done it again. I haven't lost my job, but she said, I've laid the foundation for losing my job because I lost my temper with my boss. So I said, oh dear, we're back in square one, aren't we? So I said, did you do what I told you about the using your imagination and pouring a pitcher full of ice-cold water over your head? She said, Father, I poured a bathtub full of ice-cold water over me in my imagination, but it did not do the least bit of good. So we were back at square one. Well, a temper is like that, but you've got to work on it. And I'll tell you one thing you can do. You know, St. Joseph, Blessed Joseph, is very dear to all of us. His day comes in this month of March, this blessed month of March, the 19th of March. Today's only the 6th. You've got time for a novena to Blessed Joseph, if you want to do one, 9 days before his feast. If you've got any particular problem that is troubling you, and you want to try to solve it, I'll tell you one thing you can do is take it to Joseph. He was a carpenter, remember. Take it to his carpenter shop, and let him hammer it out. The church tells us, ite a Joseph, go to Joseph. Let us go to Joseph with our problems, not only this Lent, but whenever we have a problem. But at any rate, all these sins that we have in which temptation comes and advances, and we're swept along by temptation, remember, first of all, there's a retreat route. You don't have to go on with it. You can get out of it and go back to safety. I can never stand looking down from a high place. If I get too near to the edge in a high place, I begin to get dizzy. And I feel that I'm going to fall over. So I can never, in climbing mountains or anything like that, not that I climb any, but I can never get near to any precipice. I immediately get dizzy. And it's like that in sin. Don't get too near to a precipice. But if you do get near to a precipice, it's still not too late to get back. So now this sin business, this dirty game that we're all in together, it's something we have to deal with. We can't just let it go on. It's something we've got to stop somewhere along the line and do it with all of our power. But we don't have enough power. Let's face it. We do not have enough power to conquer our sins. So we have to go to our blessed Lord. He died on the cross to rid us of those sins if we unite ourselves with him. Let us go to our Blessed Mother. She gave up her Son on the cross and suffered incredible torments in his passion. She shared his passion. And she can help us. And go to Joseph. Go to the saints. Go to the angels. Use the rosary. But make this a good Lent. We're not quite halfway through it yet. Let us, in the rest of Lent, let us take our problems, and in fasting and prayer and in communion with our blessed Lord, let us try to conquer them. Remember that hell is a reality. The devil is a reality. The flesh and the world are realities. And all those stand there as hideous realities of our human existence. People these days don't like to talk about hell. But it's there. The children of Fatima had a hideous, ghastly vision of hell. Our Lady showed it to them. And they were terrified, paralyzed with fear. We must fear hell. In these days we fear. We're full of fears. But so many of the things we fear are wrong things. We shouldn't fear them. Some people, a great many people, fear what their neighbor across the street is going to think of them for going to church. Boys in their teens fear what other boys are going to say, what they're going to call them sissy if they don't smoke pot with them. We fear so many things which we need not fear, which are trivial things. But the thing we must fear is the last judgment and hell. And those are realities for the Roman Catholic. We believe in them profoundly. We believe that we're going to have to stand before our blessed Lord the last day. We're going to have to give an account. We believe that if we persist in sin, if we refuse the grace of God, that the possibility of hell is very real. However, we Roman Catholics have a remedy, that is confession. In the conciliar church, that counterfeit church which still calls itself Roman Catholic and has no business to, confession is almost completely eliminated. They have a silly little thing they call general confession, in which they go to church. The minister reads some little list of sins, and then they all say together a general confession, prayer, and then they're given a sort of an absolution. That isn't confession. In confession, sacramental confession, we have to kneel down and in humility, and perhaps in shame, we have to confess our sins in the presence of another human being. And that is a hard thing. I find it hard, I can tell you, as a priest, as you do as laity. But it's so good for us. It is so good for us. And that is the way to deal with sin. Go to confession. Hand it over to God and receive the healing grace of his forgiveness. And then life begins all over again. When I lived in Spain, I used to go to a Carmelite church for confession. And Spanish churches very often, especially the old churches, have magnificent confessionals. A beautiful wood carving and huge things. And this was a beautiful confession I always went to a Carmelite priest. And up over that confessional was a picture, a beautiful picture. It was the prodigal son going back to his father. And the father had his arms out like this, and the son with his head down, and tears going down his cheeks, was running to his father's arms. And that's what we do when we go to confession. We go to our blessed Father's arms, God's arms, and he takes us back, ever so gently, and he gives us the healing balm of his forgiveness. God bless all of you. Have a good Lent.